If Shedeur steps in, the whole Browns plan collapses. So what are they hiding?
And, I think Stefanski is actually a good coach. I don't think he's a great coach. I think he's a good coach, but he's had 6 years now. I think Andrew Berry's a smart, hardworking, good guy. But I think he's had a fair chance to really demonstrate that they could build a roster that, if they fix the quarterback problem, can go a long way. I don't think they're there yet either. I think the defense is a BB plus. I don't think it's an A either. But it's a very good defense. It's in the top, maybe third of the defenses in the league.
We have good process, okay? And if you'd have told me, let's see, we picked him on Saturday, right? Friday night driving home, y'all are going to pick Shedeur, I would say that's not happening. But we had a conversation early that morning, and then we had a conversation later that day. I think we had the right people involved in the conversation. At the end of the day, that's Andrew Berry's call. Andrew made the call to pick Shedeur. Just like who's going to start or what play we're going to call is Kevin's call. But that's Andrew's call. He made the call.
The whispers are getting louder. And this time, they're coming from someone who actually knows what it's like to run this circus. A former Browns CEO just went on record, and what he said about the current state of Cleveland's front office should have Jimmy Haslam sweating bullets. We're talking about a full organizational autopsy on live media, exposing the tank job, the draft disasters, and why playing Dylan Gabriel over Shedeur Sanders isn't just questionable, it's organizational malpractice. But here's where it gets spicy. This isn't just criticism. This is a former insider basically forcing Haslam's hand, laying out exactly why Shedeur is the only logical move left and why delaying it any longer could cost them everything. Buckle up, because what you're about to hear is going to make you question if the Browns even want to win.
It's very hard to establish. Listen, at this point, I think they try and end up with as high a pick as they can. It doesn't make any sense to me trading Pritchett and Flacco, and I know that the Bengals will accept that they trade him in the division, but why wouldn't they? That means they lose another game when they play them.
He's basically saying that they're tanking.
He escaped, and while he's out there starting his new life in baseball, Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry are left behind in the ruins, wondering who's next. Stefanski's smiling for the cameras, but that tight, uneasy grin says it all. He's coaching like a man who knows the clock's ticking. Every game feels like a job interview he's already failed. Berry's the same way, refreshing job listings under the table, probably wondering if former Browns GM will help or haunt his resume. Meanwhile, Haslam's pacing the hallways like a storm in a suit, talking about culture and accountability while quietly plotting his next round of firings. Is hard enough. To him, cleaning house means everyone. Coaches, staff, even the poor guy who fills the Gatorade coolers. Nobody's safe when Haslam's angry, and angry doesn't...
Look, I'm not here to sugarcoat this for you. What you're about to hear isn't coming from some hot take artist trying to get clicks. This is coming from a man who sat in the big chair, who made the calls, who understands the pressure cooker that is running an NFL franchise. And when someone like that goes on record and basically tells you that the emperor has no clothes, you better listen. So let me paint you the picture of what just happened. A former CEO who ran the Browns back in 2012-2013 just sat down for an interview, and within the first 30 seconds, he dropped a bomb that should have every single person in that organization scrambling. When asked what he thinks the Browns are up to right now, his response wasn't corporate speak. It wasn't political. It was brutally, devastatingly honest. It's very hard to listen to at this point. I think they're trying to end up with as high a pick as they can. Let that sink in for a second. A former CEO just confirmed what we've all been whispering about since week one. They're tanking, deliberately, intentionally, systematically dismantling any chance at winning games in 2025 to position themselves for what exactly? And here's where the plot thickens, because he didn't stop there. He went on to question why they traded away Amari Cooper and Joe Flacco, two players who could actually help you win games. And the kicker? He said trading them within the division makes perfect sense if your goal is to lose. That means they lose another game when they play them. This man just exposed the entire strategy on live media, and nobody in Cleveland's front office can say a word to defend it because he's absolutely right.
There's no one good coming out in 26. In the 2026 draft, there's no really good quarterbacks coming out. And I think they're getting these picks to use them as trades. I think that's what the Browns is about to do. The Browns need wide receiver help in a major way. I think they missed out on a wide receiver.
But here's what's keeping me up at night, and it's the same thing that's probably got Jimmy Haslam pacing his office right now. If you're tanking, you better have a damn good reason. You better have a generational talent waiting at the end of that rainbow. You better have a quarterback who's going to change the entire trajectory of your franchise. And according to this former CEO, that player doesn't exist in the 2026 draft. Quote, "There's no really good quarterbacks coming out." So, let me get this straight. You're losing on purpose. You're trading away talent. You're playing inferior quarterbacks week after week. You're destroying whatever culture you had left in that locker room. And for what? For a draft class that doesn't even have the answer you're looking for? Now, this is where the Shedeur Sanders conversation becomes impossible to ignore. Because while Cleveland is busy tanking for a future that doesn't exist, there's a quarterback warming up in New York right now who could be the solution to every single problem this former CEO just outlined. And the fact that they're still not playing him, that's not just bad coaching, that's organizational incompetence at the highest level. But wait, because it gets even more interesting when you hear what he said about the current quarterback situation. The former CEO didn't pull any punches when discussing Dylan Gabriel and the young quarterbacks in the room. He said they're doing the right thing by seeing if these young guys have what it takes. But then he dropped this absolutely devastating line. Quote, "I don't think either of them have what it takes, in my opinion."
Get the benefit of his talent versus the young guys. I mean, they're doing the right thing and seeing if either the young quarterbacks have what it could take or they just have to pick somebody this year. I don't think either of them have what it takes, in my opinion. By the way, I know there's a lot of talk about Sanders. And listen, they could lose all 5 of their offensive linemen at the end of the season. I'll decide they're not good enough. And they just had a draft that, at least in Cleveland, was covered as a great draft without picking one offensive lineman, even at the end of the draft.
Boom. That's not speculation. That's not a hot take. That's an insider who understands quarterback evaluation telling you flat out that the current QB room isn't the answer. And almost immediately after saying that, he brought up Shedeur Sanders by name. The timing of that isn't coincidental, my friends. He's connecting the dots for anyone willing to pay attention. But here's where this former CEO really started swinging for the fences. He went after the offensive line situation, and this is crucial, because it's the #1 excuse people use when they try to argue against bringing in Shedeur. Listen to what he said. They could lose all 5 of their offensive linemen at the end of the season. They'll have decided they're not good enough, and they just had a draft that, at least in Cleveland, was covered as a great draft without picking one offensive lineman, even at the end of the draft, to possibly develop. Let me translate that for you. The organization knows the offensive line is a disaster. They knew it going into the 2025 draft, and they still didn't address it. Not in the first round, not in the middle rounds, not even with a late-round flyer. That's not an oversight. That's a fundamental failure in team-building philosophy.
It's very hard to establish. Listen, at this point, I think they're trying to end up with as high a pick as they can. It doesn't make any sense to me trading Pritchard and Flacco. And, I know that the Bengals were upset that they traded him in the division, but why wouldn't they? That means they lose another game when they play them.
He's basically saying that they're tanking. That's why they're playing Dylan Gabriel. I was one of the first people in the...
And this is where the former CEO really put Haslam and the entire front office on blast. He said Kevin Stefanski is a good coach, but not a great coach, and that after 6 years, we've seen enough to know what he is. He called Andrew Berry a smart, hardworking, good guy, but followed it up with the most damning assessment. I think he's had a fair chance to really demonstrate that they can build a roster that, if they fix the quarterback problem, can go a long way. I don't think they're there yet either. 6 years. 6 years, and the roster still isn't built to compete, even if you solve the quarterback problem. The defense is good. He gave them credit for being in the top third of the league. But everything else? It's a mess. The offensive line is crumbling. The wide receiver room is mediocre. The coaching staff has hit their ceiling, and the front office has consistently failed to build a complete team. So when this former CEO says they got to make some front office changes, he's not being dramatic. He's being honest about what everyone can see, but nobody in the organization wants to admit. Now here's where I'm going to shift gears for a second, because I need you to understand something that the mainstream media isn't talking about yet. There's video footage of Shedeur Sanders warming up in New York. Brief clips, 7-second snippets, and it's driving the fan base absolutely crazy because they can't get any real information. But here's the question nobody's asking. Why are these clips so short? Why aren't we seeing full warm-up routines? Why is there seemingly a blackout on filming Shedeur during pregame?
I don't think they're allowed to film Shedeur like that, bro. Which is crazy, because if y'all not allowed to film him like that, that means that they don't want the hype. They kind of want to kill the Shedeur hype.
Some people think it's because the organization doesn't want to build the hype. They want to control the narrative. They don't want the fans demanding he play before they're ready to make that decision. And if that's true, that's one of the most backwards, fan-hostile decisions I've ever seen in professional sports. Because here's the reality. Shedeur Sanders warming up in New York while Dylan Gabriel struggles through another game is the story. The fact that they're hiding it, limiting it, controlling access to it, that tells you everything you need to know about how scared this organization is of the pressure that comes with having Shedeur on the roster. Now, here's the part that should absolutely terrify Browns fans about what's coming next. Let's talk about what's really happening behind the scenes. Because the former CEO actually gave us a clue when he talked about those draft picks. He said, I think they're getting these picks to use them as trades, not to draft a quarterback, not to build through the draft, to make trades. And that's when everything clicks into place. Cleveland isn't tanking for a 2026 quarterback. They already know that draft class is weak at the position. They're tanking to stockpile assets for a complete roster overhaul. They're collecting ammunition to fix the offensive line, to upgrade at wide receiver, to patch every single hole that Andrew Berry failed to address over the past 6 years.
This changes. They got to get to the point where they can dominate those lines, and hopefully they got a high enough pick that one of the quarterbacks that's there is their answer.
Hey, you made it all the way to the end. Thanks.
See, everybody's thinking that they're taking for quarterback play. I think they're taking to use these picks to make some trades. I don't believe the Browns. See, going into this thing, everybody thought Arch Manning was going to be the guy, which Arch Manning is starting to turn his whole situation around. But ultimately,
he said they're going to lose all 5 offensive linemen after this season because they've already decided they're not good enough. So you're telling me we should wait to start Shedeur until when exactly? Next year, when you have 5 new offensive linemen who have never played together? That's when you want to start your franchise quarterback in a completely rebuilt line that needs time to develop chemistry? Or do you start him now, let him get experience in live game situations, let him develop chemistry with the receivers, let him understand NFL speed and complexity so that when you do fix that offensive line through trades and free agency, he's ready to take off? The former CEO talked about getting back to basics and dominating the lines of scrimmage. Okay, great, but that takes time. You're not fixing that offensive line overnight. You're not creating a dominant running game in one offseason. So while you're rebuilding those trenches, don't you want your quarterback getting reps? Don't you want him learning the system, understanding the defense, building trust with his teammates? And here's where it gets really interesting about why Shedeur is actually perfect for this situation. Let's talk about what makes Shedeur Sanders different from every other young quarterback in the league right now. This kid has been preparing for the NFL since he was old enough to hold a football. He's been coached by one of the greatest athletes of all time. He's played in high-pressure situations at Colorado where the offensive line wasn't exactly the Great Wall of China, and he still produced at an elite level.
You know what Shedeur is great at? Quick decisions, getting the ball out fast, reading defenses pre-snap, all the things you need when your offensive line is struggling. He's not a guy who holds onto the ball forever, waiting for routes to develop. He's not going to take unnecessary sacks. He's been trained his entire life to operate in chaos. And right now, Cleveland is the definition of chaos. The former CEO mentioned that the defense is in the top third of the league. Let's call it what it is. That's an A-level defense being held back by an F-level offense. You've got Myles Garrett still playing at an elite level. You've got pieces on that defense that can keep you in games. What you don't have is a quarterback who can make enough plays to let that defense win you games. Dylan Gabriel isn't that guy. The former CEO already told you that. He doesn't think either of the young quarterbacks currently in the room have what it takes. So why are we still pretending this is a competition? Why are we still acting like there's a question about who should be under center? Now let's talk about that Jets game because this is where the rubber meets the road. The Jets are 1-8. They're one of the worst teams in football right now. If Dylan Gabriel goes out there and lays an egg against that defense, against that team in front of the New York media market, there is no excuse left. None. Zero. You can't blame the offensive line. You can't blame the receivers. You can't blame the play calling. At some point, you have to look at the quarterback position and admit that what you're doing isn't working. And that's exactly what the former CEO was getting at. He said they're trying to see if these young quarterbacks have what it takes, but he's already concluded they don't. So every snap Dylan Gabriel takes is a wasted opportunity. Every game Shedeur sits on the bench is organizational negligence. Here's what I think is really happening, and you can call me a conspiracy theorist if you want, but stick with me. I think the Browns organization is terrified of starting Shedeur Sanders because it forces them to admit that the Deshaun Watson trade was the biggest disaster in franchise history. Think about it. If you start Shedeur and he balls out, and I think he will, you're basically telling the entire world that you gave up 3 first-round picks and $230 million guaranteed for a quarterback who can't stay healthy, can't win games, and might never play for your team again.
That's humiliating. That's a fireable offense for everyone involved in that decision. So instead, they're prolonging the inevitable. They're playing Dylan Gabriel. They're pretending there's still a competition. They're hoping that somehow, some way, they can avoid the national media crushing them for one of the worst trades in NFL history. But you know what? That former CEO just put all of that on Front Street. He basically said the entire organization has failed, from ownership to the general manager to the coaching staff. He said they've had 6 years to build a winner, and they're not even close. He said the roster isn't good enough even if you fix the quarterback problem. And most importantly, he said there's no one worth tanking for in 2026. So if you're Jimmy Haslam and you hear all of that, what's your move? Do you keep pretending Dylan Gabriel is the answer? Do you keep tanking for a draft class that doesn't have your franchise quarterback? Or do you swallow your pride, admit the Watson trade was a mistake, and give the ball to the most NFL-ready quarterback on your roster? Because here's what happens if Cleveland loses to that 1-7 Jets team this weekend. If the Browns go into New York and get embarrassed by a Jets team that's already packed it in for the season, the pressure on Haslam in the front office becomes unbearable. You can't spin that. You can't blame injuries or bad breaks or anything else. You got beat by a team that's actively trying to lose just like you are, except they're actually worse at football than you are. And in that moment, every single thing the former CEO said becomes impossible to ignore. The fans will be calling for changes. The media will be destroying the organization. And that video of Shedeur warming up in New York, those 7-second clips that the Browns tried to keep quiet, will be playing on loop on every sports show in the country. The question won't be, should Shedeur start? The question will be, why hasn't he been starting? And nobody in that building will have a good answer. Kevin Stefanski won't have an answer. Andrew Berry won't have an answer. And Jimmy Haslam definitely won't have an answer that satisfies a fan base that's been suffering for decades. You want to know why I think Shedeur is the answer? It's not just because of his arm talent or his football IQ or his pedigree. It's because everything the former CEO criticized about this organization, the lack of a plan, the failed roster construction, the inability to develop talent, all of that becomes less important if you have a quarterback who can elevate everyone around him. The offensive line is trash. Shedeur's quick release minimizes that weakness. The receivers are mediocre. Shedeur's accuracy makes them better. The coaching staff has hit their ceiling. A franchise quarterback can cover up a lot of coaching deficiencies. The defense is good but overworked. Shedeur can give them rest by sustaining drives and putting points on the board. This isn't rocket science. It's basic football logic. And the fact that a former CEO had to go on record and spell it out for everyone shows you just how lost this organization really is.
So here's where we're at. A former Browns CEO just publicly dissected everything wrong with the organization. He confirmed they're tanking. He said the current quarterbacks aren't the answer. He questioned the front office's ability to build a roster. And he mentioned Shedeur Sanders by name as the guy they should be looking at. This isn't some random analyst throwing out hot takes. This is someone who understands the pressure, the politics, and the reality of running an NFL franchise, telling Jimmy Haslam and everyone else in that building, you're out of time, you're out of excuses, and the answer is already on your roster. The question is, will they have the courage to admit they were wrong about Watson, wrong about their drafting strategy, and wrong about waiting to start Shedeur? Or are they going to keep playing this game, keep losing to terrible teams, and keep wasting everyone's time? Drop a comment right now. Do you think the Browns are scared to start Shedeur because it exposes how bad the Watson trade really was? And if they lose to the Jets this weekend, is there any excuse left not to give him the ball? And look, if you made it this far, you're part of the real ones who understand what's actually happening in Cleveland. This isn't just about football anymore. This is about organizational pride, about ego, about admitting mistakes. And sometimes the hardest thing for people in power to do is admit they were wrong. But that former CEO just gave them a roadmap. He laid out every problem. He identified the solution. And he did it publicly, so there's no hiding from it. Hit that subscribe button because when Shedeur finally gets his shot, and trust me, it's coming sooner than the Browns want to admit, you're going to want to be here for every single moment of that story. This is about to get real interesting, and we're going to be here to break down every angle, every decision, and every excuse they try to make along the way. The clock is ticking on Cleveland, and after what that former CEO just said, the whole world is watching to see what Jimmy Haslam does next.